The world feels like it's balanced on a knife's edge, doesn't it? For decades, a handful of Western nations, the G7, basically set the world's economic and political thermostat. They were the ones who built the rules-based order we hear so much about. But if you look a little closer, the ground is definitely shaking under their feet. There's a new player in town, BRICS, and they represent nearly half the world's population. They're not just knocking on the door anymore. They're practically redesigning the whole house. So, is this the G7's last stand? Are we watching Western dominance fade as BRICS sketches out a brand new future? The big question isn't just who will rule, but who really rules right now. The old guard. G7's reign. For the best part of 50 years, the Group of Seven, that's Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, the UK, and the US, with the EU also playing a big role, has been mission control for global policy. Cooked up during the economic chaos of the 1970s, the G7 pretty much became the world economy's steering committee. Their summits decided what was important. Their financial arms like the World Bank and IMF shaped how countries developed. And when a global crisis hit, they were the united front responding. Just think about it. From sorting out financial meltdowns to slapping on sanctions and promoting democracy, the G7's power was, for a very long time, unmatched. They championed free markets, pushed for globalization, and really, they defined the world after the Cold War. Their economic power was incredible. Even as recently as the early 1990s, the G7 countries together accounted for a huge 63% of the entire world's GDP. They were the undisputed champions, the ones making the rules, and most of the time enforcing them. Their lead in research and development, pouring in about $1.2 trillion a year, cemented their top dog status, especially in cool new tech like AI and green energy. But power, as we know, doesn't last forever. While the G7 put on a show of solid agreement, the seeds of change were already quietly sprouting somewhere else. The challenger emerges. BRICS Rises. While the G7 was busy in its exclusive club, a new group of nations was starting to shine. BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, and China, an acronym an economist came up with to point out investment hotspots, started to become something much, much bigger. South Africa hopped on board later, bringing in a vital African perspective. Now, this wasn't just another group of countries in the same region. This was a gathering of giants. We're talking nations with massive populations, tons of natural resources, and economies that were just booming. Their rise wasn't slow and steady. It was like a rocket. China's crazy economic growth, India's young population and fast development, Brazil's strength in commodities, Russia's energy wealth, and South Africa's position as a gateway to a whole continent. On their own, they were a big deal. Together, they were a game changer, and they didn't stop there. The BRICS group has been getting bigger, which is a clear sign they're ambitious and other countries are interested. In 2024, Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, and the United Arab Emirates were welcomed in. Then, in January 2025, Indonesia became the 10th member, the first one from Southeast Asia. Several other nations are now partner countries, and a whole lot more are saying they want to join. This BRICS Plus group now represents a massive slice of humanity and a quickly growing piece of the global economic pie. They're not just challenging the G7's numbers, they're challenging the whole story of Western-led global leadership. They're talking about a multipolar world, where the global South gets its voice heard and takes its proper seat at the table. The battleground, head-to-head comparison. So, how do these heavyweights actually compare in 2025? The numbers tell a pretty dramatic story of a world in flux. Let's talk about economic firepower. The G7 still has the edge if you look at nominal GDP, which is around 45 to 46 trillion. That's about 43 to 45% of the world's total. But BRICS is catching up, with their combined nominal GDP sitting around 27 to 29 trillion, 25 to 30%. Here's a twist, though. When you consider purchasing power parity, PPP, which many economists think gives a more accurate picture of real economic strength, some reports suggest BRICS might have already overtaken the G7. One IMF report even said BRICS made up 40% of the global economy in PPP terms in 2024, and that's expected to hit 41% in 2025, while the G7 is around 28 to 29%. Growth rates? That story is even more striking. BRICS nations are expected to grow much faster in 2025 and 2026, with average growth around 3.4% to 4.4%. The G7 countries? They're looking at a much slower pace, around 1% to 1.7%. And when it comes to people, it's not even a contest. BRICS countries are home to nearly half the world's population. We're talking 3.5 to 4 billion people, compared to the G7's roughly 800 million. This isn't just about head counts, it's about brain power, market size, and what the future could hold. Then there's who controls the resources. BRICS nations are huge players in energy, metals, and food. Bringing in countries like Saudi Arabia, though their official membership is still being worked out as of early 2025, and the UAE seriously boosts BRICS muscle in the energy department. Politically, BRICS is making sure everyone knows they're here. They're getting louder about wanting to shake up international bodies like the UN, IMF, and World Bank, arguing these places reflect an old, Western-focused power setup. They've even started their own financial institutions like the New Development Bank, NDB, to pay for infrastructure and sustainable development projects, giving an alternative to the usual lenders. And maybe one of the biggest challenges on the table, de-dollarization. BRICS nations are actively looking for ways to use the US dollar less in international trade and finance. Things like pushing for trade in their own local currencies, building new payment systems like BRICS Pay, and even talking about a common reserve currency, though that's super complex and not happening tomorrow, are all part of this strategy. This isn't just about money. It's a political statement aimed at reducing US financial power and protecting their economies from potential sanctions. While a full-blown BRICS currency replacing their own isn't likely anytime soon because their economies are so different and they don't have shared political bodies, the move towards using national currencies for trade within the bloc is definitely happening. G7's last stand? Are there cracks in the armor? So, with BRICS gaining so much ground, is the G7 really making its last stand? Last stand might sound a bit like a movie tagline, but there's no doubt the G7 is facing some major headwinds. Their slice of the global GDP has clearly shrunk from what it used to be. And internally, the G7 hasn't always been a picture of unity. We've seen trade spats, different ideas on how to deal with China, and sometimes their foreign policies haven't quite lined up, showing some cracks in the foundation. That G7 summit in Kananaskis, Canada, back in June 2025? It really put some of these tensions on display. While leaders talked a good game about supporting Ukraine and aiming for economic stability, the fact that a formal joint statement was missing at one point hinted at some deep disagreements, especially with the US on certain trade and global issues. Plus, people keep criticizing the G7, asking if it really represents the world anymore, especially a world with so many power centers. Some analysts say that G7 countries aren't giving as much development aid as they used to, which looks like they're less committed to global teamwork. Right when global crises need more cooperation, not less. The G7's power to just set the global agenda by itself has faded, and now it has to actually engage with, and sometimes just react to, what groups like BRICS are doing. Is BRICS carving the future, ambitions, and hurdles? BRICS definitely has big plans. They want to be a major player in creating a new global order, one that gives a louder voice to the global south and challenges the old power structures. They're focused on boosting economic growth among themselves, pushing for sustainable development, increasing trade in their own currencies, and taking on a bigger role in how the world is run. New ideas, like the BRICS Center for Industrial Competences launched in 2025, are about beefing up skills and partnerships for the next wave of industry, Industry 4.0. Brazil, which is leading BRICS in 2025, is really pushing sustainable development, climate finance, and even how to manage AI. But BRICS isn't one single united force, and it has its own obstacles to overcome. The group is incredibly diverse, different political systems, different economic approaches, and sometimes their national interests clash. Take India and China, two of its most powerful members. They have ongoing border issues and are strategic rivals. Getting everyone on the same page for deep policy changes like the G7 often manages, since they share more common ground on democracy and market economies, is a huge challenge for BRICS. While there's a lot of talk about de-dollarization and even a common currency, getting everyone to agree on and actually implement such massive financial changes is a gigantic task. Some members, like India, are pretty cautious. Brazil, for instance, actually dropped the idea of a common currency from its 2025 BRICS agenda after some pushback from the US, deciding to focus on trading in local currencies instead. And honestly, with so many different countries in the expanded BRICS+, making decisions could get even more complicated. Who really rules now? So, after all that, who really runs the world these days? Well, the answer is getting more and more complicated. It's definitely not as simple as saying the G7 is in charge anymore. The rise of BRICS shows a clear shift away from a world dominated by one superpower, or even just the West, towards a reality with many poles of power. The G7 isn't ancient history just yet. It still has a lot of economic clout, leads the way in new technology, and is a key place for advanced democracies to coordinate their policies. Its members have serious financial power and can act together on security stuff, like we saw with their response to the conflict in Ukraine. The G7 is also trying to adapt by talking more with countries from the global south and focusing on new challenges like economic security and making sure supply chains are strong. Canada's G7 presidency in 2025, for example, has been all about boosting global security and building partnerships for the future, including inviting key emerging economies like India to their summit. However, you just can't deny that BRICS is rewriting the rulebook. Their combined economic strength, their huge populations, and their growing confidence on the world stage mean they can't be ignored or told what to do anymore. They're actively building their own alternatives and questioning the rules set by the West. The expansion of BRICS clearly shows they want to build a wider coalition representing all sorts of interests from the global south. This ultimate global power struggle isn't necessarily about one side winning and the other losing. It's more like we're seeing a more spread out and contested world map. The G7's long-held dominance is being seriously challenged, not by one single rival, but by a powerful and growing group that has a different idea for how the world should be run. The G7 might not be on its literal last stand, as in about to collapse, but its days of being the unquestioned top dog are over. The future will probably be shaped by how these influential groups interact, compete, and hopefully sometimes work together. The question of who rules is becoming less about one single boss and more about figuring out a world with multiple centers of power and influence. This is a massive shift, and it's all happening as we speak. So, what do you think? Is the G7 changing fast enough? Or is BRICS basically guaranteed to become the world's leading force? Who do you think really holds the power in this new era? We really want to hear your thoughts, so drop them in the comments below. And if this breakdown gave you something to chew on, please give this video a like, subscribe for more insights into global power shifts, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss what we explore next. The global power chessboard is being reset, no doubt about it. The G7, the long-reigning champion, now has a very serious challenger in BRICS. This isn't just a fight over who has more money. It's a battle of ideas, of influence, and of visions for what tomorrow looks like. Will this lead to a more balanced and fair world? Or a more divided and shaky one? Honestly, only time will tell. But one thing is crystal clear. The old rules just don't apply anymore, and the G7 is scrambling to figure out its place in a world it no longer runs all by itself. The rise of BRICS isn't just a footnote in a history book, it's the headline story of our times.